I knew the water was wrong the second it touched my tongue. Not taste, not smell. Wait, a heaviness that didn't belong in a bottle, with a seal that snapped clean. Aaron smiled across the Christmas table, like a man rehearsing innocence. Sienna raised her wine and made a toast to family and a new year. I lifted my glass and swallowed once to keep the act alive. My chest tightened. Slow, measured, not panic. Numbers marched in my head the way they always had. 40 years catching lies in balance sheets taught me to count even with the room spinning. I set my fork down and asked for more water. I stood. The chandelier cut the dining room into hard light and soft shadows. Sienna said the turkey would get cold. Aaron told me to take my time. Dad. The way he said Dad made the room smaller. In the kitchen, I found the pile no one had bothered to hide. Envelopes, catalogs, a thick windowed letter from an insurance company that had no business with me. I brushed it with my sleeve, and the stack collapsed. I picked it up. My name. My address. Opened. 3-week-old policy confirmation. Insured Michael Reed. Beneficiary Aaron Reed. Value $2 million. My heartbeat stepped off the metronome and started running. Beside the sink, a half-empty Fiji and a small clear vial with no label hid behind a salt cellar. A single drop clung to the bottom, like it was waiting for gravity to make a decision. That's when the math stopped being math and became murder. I didn't shout. I didn't throw the bottle. I slid the policy back into the envelope. I palmed the vial. My hand was steady. The cameras in the corner were not mine, but I had installed the first set here months ago. Same angles, same black lens. They'd forgotten who taught Aaron to set them up. I opened a sealed bottle from the fridge. I drank. I breathed. I practiced my face in the reflection of the microwave door. Back to neutral. Back to the man too tired to notice anything. When I sat at the table, Sienna flashed that glossy smile. She wore like jewelry. Feeling better, Michael? Much better. The water helped. Aaron watched my eyes. I watched his hands. That watch on his wrist cost at least $10,000. I had given him $50,000 6 months ago to keep his lights on. He used it to buy time. And a watch. The symptoms never spiked. The band around my chest loosened. I knew why by dessert. Whatever I swallowed wasn't enough. They messed up the dose. Or I got lucky. I have never believed in luck. I drove home without music. I put the deadbolt in place. I set the vial on the kitchen table and turned on the smallest lamp in the house. People think revenge is heat. It's not. It's cold storage. You take the feeling, and you freeze it until it's a tool. I took a photograph of the vial. I labeled it. I wrote the date and time in my book. I made coffee I wouldn't drink. I dialed a number I had not used in 3 years. Gary picked up on the second ring. You still running that tox lab on Route 17? He said he was. I told him I had 2 ounces of a problem and 1 tiny bottle of proof. Bring it by after closing. And Michael, don't drink anything else tonight. I told him I was done drinking, at least until I finished the audit of my own murder. Gary's lab smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. He wore a sweatshirt under his coat and the same tired eyes I remember from the winter. We pulled his truck out of a ditch at 2 a.m. He didn't ask how I got the sample. He just asked if I wanted the quick panel or the full workup. I told him I wanted the truth faster than my son could destroy more evidence. He said he could have preliminaries in 24 hours. I told him I needed a name tonight. He drew 2 samples. He logged the vial, photographed it, handed me a chain of custody form, and slid a sterile drop to a machine that hummed like a refrigerator. We waited without talking. The screen spat out peaks, and a word I didn't want expected anyway. Cardioactive glycoside. Plant-based. Dose-dependent. Not enough to stop my heart outright. Enough to make me doubt the next glass. I drove home slower this time. I made a copy of the vial's photo on 3 flash drives and hid them in 3 places no one checks unless they know me. I wrote what I knew in 1 column and what I could prove in another. What I knew, Aaron is broke. Sienna spends money that doesn't exist. New Lexus. Aspen trip. The $2 million policy. The dose. What I could prove, Gary's preliminary, the policy letter, camera angles in their kitchen that might show hands where they shouldn't be. I needed the footage. Years ago, I had given Aaron a home camera kit when he moved in with Sienna. He never read manuals. The default admin password wasn't clever. I opened my laptop and found the cloud portal. I tried the obvious. It worked. Their living room bloomed on my screen in clean HD. Date stamps. Motion flags. A green square over Sienna's hands at the counter 2 hours before dinner. She reached under the island and pulled out a little black case. She unsnapped it. A vial glinted. She turned her back to the camera. She didn't turn far enough. I saved the clip. I watched another. At 3:11 p.m., Aaron opened the mail. He held the insurance letter like it was a lottery ticket. He kissed Sienna. She said, "Careful." He laughed. He said, "It has to look natural." My hand closed into a fist so tight my knuckles popped. I loosened it. Cold storage. I called my cardiologist at 8 a.m. and lied. Said I had chest tightness yesterday. Probably stress. Wanted an EKG to be safe. He saw me at 10. Baseline good. Rhythm strong. He warned me about holiday food and said to hydrate. I told him I was on it. I walked out with a time-stamped note that said my heart was fine. At noon, I bought a burner phone. I texted Aaron from a number he didn't know. You shouldn't have opened his mail. His reply came fast. "Who is this?" I didn't answer. I wanted him to sweat. Sweating men make mistakes. I drove to a locksmith and had 2 copies of a key made I hoped I didn't need. Then I drove to a storage unit I rented under a different name and loaded a case onto a rolling cart. Cameras. Mics. A black suit I hadn't worn since Grace's funeral. I didn't touch the suit. I touched the lapel like it was a shoulder. The audit had a plan now. Step 1, confirm the poison. Step 2, secure the footage. Step 3, move my assets where their hands couldn't reach. Step 4, make them talk on record. Step 5, make them choose each other or the police. The part of me that chased fraud for a living wanted confession. The part of me that buried my wife wanted something darker. I wrote both goals down. Then I crossed one out. First the law, then whatever's left. I called Aaron and told him the dinner wore me out. I said my chest hurt all night. His voice broke into sympathy, so fast it tripped. You should have called, Dad. We would have driven over. I told him I didn't want to be a burden. He took the bait. Come for brunch tomorrow. Sienna's making eggs Benedict. Soft, rich food. Easy to hide a drop in. Perfect. I told him I'd be there at 11. I put on my old man coat. I added a tremor to my hand. I left my cane in the closet on purpose and borrowed one from a neighbor that looked like it had stories. I parked 1 block away and walked slow to their townhouse. Doorbell cam saw me coming. Sienna opened the door in a sweater that said effortless and a face that said calculation. You look tired, Michael. Long night. She touched my arm without touching it. Aaron guided me to the table with a hand on my back that used to be the same size as my palm when he was 5. Coffee? Water? Water, I said. He poured from the fridge. I watched the seal crack on a fresh bottle. Smart boy. New bottle, new alibi. Sienna slid a plate in front of me, sharp ham. Soft yolk. A sauce I could never make right even when Grace coached from the cookbook. I picked up the fork. I didn't eat. Not yet. The camera I planted last year sat in a smoke detector above the island. The one I planted last night lived in the dining room vent. Both fed my phone in my pocket. I asked about Aspen. I asked about the firm. Aaron said words that sounded like a brochure. Sienna mentioned friends in Vail and a chalet that sleeps 10. I cut into the egg and let the yolk run. I lifted a bite and paused like the effort cost me something. Sienna's eyes tracked the fork. She held her breath without knowing it. I set the fork down. I told Aaron a banker called me with an odd question about a wire out of his LLC. I said I might swing by the branch with him later, see what the confusion was. His face changed around the eyes. You don't have to do that, Dad. I said it would be good to spend time. The fork stayed on the plate. We moved to the couch. I asked for a glass of club soda for my stomach. Sienna went to the kitchen. My phone buzzed. The vent cam caught her opening the dishwasher, sliding something from a cutlery tray, tipping her wrist over a glass, rinsing it, then adding ice. She brought it to me and smiled. I thanked her and set it on the coaster. The fizz was too quiet. I excused myself to use the hall bathroom. I stepped inside and turned the lock. I pulled a small syringe from my pocket and drew 5 milliliters of my untouched club soda. I sealed it and slipped it into my coat. When I came out, Aaron stood too close to the door. "Everything all right?" "Everything's fine." I picked up my cane and made it shake. On my way out, I hugged my son. I smelled his aftershave in a fear he tried to sweep under a rug. Sienna hugged me, too. She whispered, "You should rest a day." I said rest sounded good. I walked to the door. The new Lexus key fob sat in a bowl with the same careless pride that lit their faces. I drove home counting. The lab called at 4. Gary said the soda held trace of the same compound. Not enough to kill, enough to tell a story. He asked if I want to call the police. "Not yet," I said. "One more step." He told me to be careful. I told him I was done with careful. Then I corrected myself. I meant I was done with mercy. Aaron wasn't always this man. He used to fix broken toasters on the kitchen floor and leave screws in neat lines like soldiers. He used to fall asleep on my chest in front of Red Sox games while Grace knitted and pretended not to cry at happy innings. Somewhere between then and now, a hole opened and my son kept feeding it money and lies. I pulled his credit reports with tools a man shouldn't admit he still has. I found 3 max cards, 1 predatory line of credit, 2 small claims judgments, and a name that made my teeth hurt. Darien Locke. Not family, not friend. A lender with a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. I knew Darien from a case in 2012. He financed desperation and collected with creativity. I followed Aaron that night. I sat in my car 2 blocks from a strip mall that looked like every other strip mall. At 9:27, he walked into a vape shop and out the back door to the alley where deals crawl like rats. A man with a shaved head and a winter coat that cost too much shook his hand. They talked close. Money moved. Aaron looked over his shoulder twice. He didn't see me. He did see a future he couldn't pay for. I took photos. I sent one to the burner number in a text that said, "You picked the wrong family to borrow from." No reply. Good. Paranoia grows best in silence. I went home and opened a box I hadn't touched since Grace died. It held her cardigan, a letter I never mailed, and the hospital discharge summary from the night before she didn't wake up. The labs flagged an electrolyte imbalance that never fit the story. I had told myself it was grief reading ghosts in numbers. Now, the numbers look like footprints. Sienna arrived in Aaron's life 4 months before Grace left mine. My hand hovered over paperwork. I called the attending listed on the form. He retired. I called the nurse whose name sat under his. She worked per diem. We met for coffee in a place where the lights are low and the cups are heavy. She remembered Grace. She remembered the quiet. She remembered a small argument between me and a pharmacist about dosage. Not mine. Someone else's voice. She couldn't place it. She did remember a young woman in the hallway with perfect hair and a coat too thin for December. She remembered the woman asking which room was Michael Reed's wife. She remembered thinking family shouldn't look that bored. I left with a weight in my pocket and a question I didn't want to ask out loud. Did Sienna practice on Grace? If she did Aaron help or just learn from it? The space between those answers is a canyon. I moved my money that night. Retirement accounts into a trust with a trigger. House title into an LLC with a boring name. The beneficiary on my own small policy changed to something that would make Aaron's lawyer sweat. I left the framed photos where they were. I let the house look like a target while I welded steel behind the drywall. Then I wrote 2 letters. One to a detective I trust. One to Aaron. The first held copies of footage, lab reports, and a timeline. The second held 3 sentences. There's a problem with the document you signed. Meet me at my lawyer's office at 10 a.m. tomorrow. Come alone. I sealed both. I mailed one. I hand-delivered the other by sliding it under a door I once opened with a key to my son's first apartment. I walked back to my car and watched the hallway camera blink red. He would read it in 7 minutes. He would not sleep. Good. The conference room at Harper & Cole looks like power. Glass wall, polished table. A view of downtown Denver that makes people stand up taller without knowing why. My lawyer, Melissa, had sharp eyes and a sharper tone when she needed it. She owed me a favor, and I asked her to cash it in today. A receptionist brought coffee. I didn't drink it. Aaron arrived at 10:03 with a face that tried to split the difference between casual and catastrophe. He looked thinner around the eyes. He hugged me like a man hugs a man. He hopes dies quietly. I introduced Melissa and said we needed to discuss an error in my estate paperwork. Error? He almost smiled. I told him I had decided to add a charitable foundation that would activate on my death. I watched the blood leave his cheeks, then force its way back. He said, "Whatever you want, Dad. It's your legacy." He meant your money. Melissa slid a stack of papers across the table. Sienna slipped in at 10:07 without apology. She wore black in confidence. "We didn't invite you," Melissa said. Sienna smiled and sat anyway. "Love is a legal interest," she said. Melissa didn't smile back. We read. We signed. We chatted about nothing while my recorder in my pocket counted seconds. Then Melissa said, "One more thing. Mr. Reed has a question about a policy he recently learned of." Aaron didn't blink. Sienna's fingers tapped the table and stopped. "I asked who sold him a $2 million term on my life 3 weeks ago. He said a friend handled it. Name? He said Daniel. I waited. He said Daniel Hargrove. Not his friend. My brother." The room tilted. I kept my face. Melissa asked for contact details. Aaron shrugged. "Dan has a new number. I can text him." I told him to. He did. No reply. He showed me the screen like a boy proves his hands are clean while his pockets bleed ink. I ended the meeting. I thanked Melissa. I told Aaron I'd be in touch. In the hallway, Sienna touched my sleeve and lowered her voice. "You scared us the other night. Don't do that again." I looked at her hand until she removed it. She added, "We love you. Family is everything." I said a sentence Grace used to say when a student lied to my face. That's a nice story. I rode the elevator down alone. My phone buzzed. A number I knew by heart and hadn't dialed in 5 years flashed on the screen. "Michael, we should talk." "Daniel." We met in a diner where secrets go to drink burnt coffee. Daniel hunched over a plate of eggs and didn't touch them. My brother used to coach Little League and fix brake lights without being asked. Now he sold policies that smelled like gasoline. He started without breathing. "It's not what you think." I said it was exactly what I thought and worse. He said Aaron came to him desperate. He said he tried to talk him out of the $2 million. Said it would draw scrutiny. Said premiums would crush him. Said underwriters would flag it. Aaron insisted. Sienna insisted more. She called Daniel twice without Aaron. She asked doctrinal questions a civilian shouldn't know. FREELA period. Contestability. Accidental death riders. She was fluent in murder insurance. I asked if he got paid. He looked at his coffee. He said he lost his license last year. He did off books for a cut that never came. I asked why he touched it at all. He said because I was his brother, and he thought I'd never die, and if I did, he thought Aaron would at least pay the premiums. Hope is a stupid investment. I asked about Grace. His eyes moved to the window and stayed there. He said he didn't know anything about that. He said Sienna scares him in a way men like us don't say out loud. He said he could get me emails and texts if I promised not to burn him to ground with them. I promised nothing. He slid a thumb drive across the table inside a napkin. I didn't touch it yet. He said one more thing. Darien Locke is in this somehow. I told him I already met Darien's shadow last night. Daniel said Darien doesn't wait for payments. He moves assets like weather. If Aaron promised in my house, Darien already thinks it's his. I left the diner with a drive and an ache where family used to be. In the car, I opened the files. Sienna's emails read like a manual. She asked Daniel what happens if an insured dies within 2 years. She asked about coroner backlogs. She asked how to stage natural causes without autopsy. She didn't use those words, but she didn't need to. I saved everything to 3 places. I sent 2 files to Melissa. I sent one to the detective with a note that said, "Now." At 9 p.m., the burner chimed. A photo filled the screen. My mailbox door hung open. The inside was empty. Beneath it, my driveway looked wrong. A smear like oil. Another text. "Nice house." Shame about the title. Darien. I turned on the porch light and saw nothing but fear pretending to be silence. I called my neighbor and asked him to park his truck in my drive. I called another and asked him to sit in my living room while I ran an errand. He asked if everything was okay. I told him not yet. I drove to errands. He wasn't home. Sienna was. I watched in the car as she carried 2 boxes to the Lexus. One had my name on it in black marker. She put both in the trunk and checked her phone. She didn't smile when she read whatever she read. She drove away. I followed at a distance until she exited toward a storage facility with blue doors and bad lighting. Sienna keyed in the code and rolled through the gate. I didn't follow. I parked in the dark beside a truck that didn't care. I walked around the back fence and found the place where the chain link trusted the ground too much. I lifted the corner and slid under like a teenager who still had knees. Inside, the air smelled like rubber and dust. Unit 312 opened with a rattle. She lifted the door halfway. Enough to duck, not enough to see her feet. I moved along the road with a phone camera held against my chest. She stacked my boxes beside a metal shelf with camping gear and a file cabinet. She took a black notebook out of her purse and wrote something with quick, tight strokes. She checked her phone again. She dialed. I heard a man answer with a low voice and a laugh that had nothing to do with humor. Darien. She said the word policy and the word window. She said he was stubborn but old. She said, "Soon." She left at 10:14. I waited 4 minutes and opened the unit with a pick I should not own. Inside, I found the black notebook. A ledger. Names. Amounts. Dates. Beside Aaron's name, $185,000 in ugly installments. Beside mine, $2 million with a star and a final word. Liquidate. I opened the file cabinet. Top drawer held tax records. Second held photocopies of IDs that didn't belong to Sienna, but did belong to her other names. Third held a brown envelope with 12 photos. Grace in a hospital bed. Me in a chair, holding her hand. A nurse passing in the hall. The back of a woman's head with perfect hair. I pressed my thumb to the glossy paper until I left a print I would later deny. I took photos of everything. I took the ledger. I left the unit how I found it, minus the one thing that could end the charade faster than police ever could. Revenge isn't heat. It's a thermostat. As I crawled back under the fence, a car rolled up slow without lights. I flattened against the dirt and felt the noise in my teeth. The gate opened. The car slid in. Another car followed. I saw the back of Aaron's head through the rear window of the second. He looked left, then right, then straight at the world that used to be his. The first car door opened and the man from the alley stepped out. Darien shook Aaron's hand and then didn't let go. They went inside. I slipped to my car and drove until the storage units were a smear in the mirror. I pulled onto a side street and let the engine idle, while my phone buzzed itself into a seizure. Melissa, Detective Shaw, Gary, my neighbor. I answered none of them. I stared at my hands on the wheel and saw someone else's for a full minute. Then I called Shaw. We met behind a grocery store that closes too early. I handed him a drive. I handed him the ledger. I told him I wanted arrests, not trophies. He said, "That's not how this always goes." I said tonight it would. Shaw moved fast. A judge signed a warrant while most of the city watched the game. Patrol cars rolled to Unit 312 at midnight. Darien didn't run. He smiled and called a lawyer whose shoes cost what my first car cost. Aaron stood beside the unit with his hands in his pockets like he didn't know what hands are for. Sienna was not there. She was at my house. My neighbor called me at 12:21. A woman knocked and said she was my daughter. He didn't open the door. He watched through the peephole as she tried a key. The key didn't work. She left. I told him to lock the back door again. I drove home with my high beams off and my mouth dry. Sienna's silhouette stood in my living room when I stepped inside. The lamp I left on made a halo around her that didn't stick. "How did you get in?" I asked without moving closer. She said the spare under the planter. There hasn't been a spare under that planter in 8 years. She smiled. She holds a smile the way some people hold knives. She said we needed to talk like adults. I said adults don't poison elders at Christmas. She said elders don't read their mail when it's not addressed to them. I said the police were reading everything now. She glanced at the mantel where a camera blinked blue behind a photo. I hadn't told her about that one. She told me a story about debt and opportunity and how the world doesn't give without taking. She said Aaron was a good man who made bad choices. She said she was the kind of woman who cleans up messes. I asked who cleaned up Grace. The smile dropped. For a second, she looked like a person who stands in wind too long. Then the mask snapped back. She said I should be careful what I accuse people while my heart is so fragile. I said my heart was fine. She took a step closer. I took one back and felt the edge of the rug under my heel. She said if I made the policy go away, Aspen would go away, Darian would go away, and we could be a family again. She said the word family like she bought a wholesale. I told her there was a new will. She said she knew. I told her there was a ledger with her handwriting. She said I should prove it. I told her about Unit 312. She did not blink. She said, "Michael, if you call the police, you'll lose Aaron." I said I already had. She left without slamming the door. I watched the street until the taillights turned small. Then I sat on the couch and let my hands shake for 30 seconds. Then I stood and made the house look like a place an old man falls a lot in. Rug secured. Corners backward. I set 1 trap in the kitchen and 2 in the hall. Not for Sienna. For someone who used to know where the spare key was. At 3 a.m., the key slid into the lock. It turned. The door opened without sound. Aaron stepped in. He walked to the kitchen. He opened the fridge. He took out a bottle of water. He unscrewed the cap, poured something in, and screwed it back on. He left it on the counter like a son leaves a gift for a father he wants to impress. The camera saw his hands. The microphone caught the breath he held. He walked to the mantel and looked at Grace's picture for too long. Then he left. Shaw watched the clip in my living room at dawn. He didn't react when Aaron's hands shook on screen. He didn't react when my son put the bottle down. He reacted when Sienna texted Aaron a minute later. "Window closes at noon. Don't miss it." Shaw asked if I could stomach one more performance. I said I could perform for a country if it got me what I wanted. We invited them for a Christmas Eve brunch. I sent the text at 8. No explanations. Just the kind of olive branch of father who doesn't like dying offers. Sienna replied with a heart. Aaron replied with a thumbs up that looked like a plea. I set the table. I set the camera. I set the bottle where Aaron left it. I set a second bottle in the fridge with a tiny scratch under the label to tell them apart. Shaw and 2 plainclothes waited in the den with the door cracked. Melissa sat at the kitchen island with a notary seal and a folder labeled amendment in case we needed a prop. They arrived at 11:12. Sienna complimented the tree. Aaron hugged me and smelled like a man who hasn't slept. We sat. I poured orange juice for them and water for me. I poured from a marked bottle, without looking at it. Sienna watched the arc of the pour the way a cat watches a string. We ate eggs I overcooked on purpose. We talked about nothing. I asked Aaron how the firm was. He said the Henderson account would change everything. He looked at Sienna when he said it. I lifted my glass. To a year where we tell the truth. I took a sip. He took a deeper one. He put the glass down too fast. I set the glass on the table and pushed my chair back like something bad was about to happen to my old man's stomach. I made a sound a man makes when he can't catch his breath. Sienna's eyes lit the way a switch flips in a dark room. Aaron stood too fast. He touched my shoulder. "Dad?" His voice cracked. I let my head hang for 1 count. 2, 3. Then I lifted it and said, "Shaw." The den door opened. 2 officers stepped out. Sienna didn't move. Aaron did. He reached for the glass like he could put the water back. Shaw told them to keep their hands on the table. He read rights in a voice that could cut wire. Sienna smiled at me across a mountain of pine boughs like the first night. She said, "You're crueler than I thought." I said, "I learned from the best." They went quietly until the handcuffs showed. Then Sienna twisted and hissed, and said things that made even the air lean back. Aaron cried. My son cried like a boy who scraped his knee and found no one waited with a Band-Aid. I didn't move. I didn't touch him. Not yet. The headlines got the numbers wrong at first. They always do. They called it a $2 million insurance scam gone wrong. They called Sienna a socialite and Aaron a struggling entrepreneur. They used a photo from a barbecue 8 years ago where my hair still had color and Grace's hand rested on my shoulder. They called Darian a financier. The truth took a few days to land. When it did, it landed hard. Sienna cut a deal first. She offered Darian's books and 3 names from a list that stretched across state lines. She offered a sentence with an end. She offered me a meeting through her lawyer. I declined. Aaron didn't talk. He sat in a room with a public defender and a fluorescent light and spoke only when the judge asked him to confirm his name. The detective asked me if I wanted to speak with him. I said no and meant it for 24 hours. On the 25th, I called Shaw at 6 a.m. and said I'd changed my mind. We met in a gray room that smells like pencil shavings and old plans. Aaron stared at the table. I sat. He didn't look up. He said he was sorry in a tone that made the word feel thinner than paper. I asked him if he remembered the toaster. He didn't answer. I said you lined the screws like soldiers. You cried when one rolled off the table because you thought it ruined everything. You were 6. You wanted it perfect. You couldn't stand the space between almost and done. He folded. He said Grace was an accident. He said he didn't know what Sienna did, only that Grace's last week looked wrong, and he didn't ask questions because the silence paid their rent when mine didn't. He said he signed a policy because Darian stood in his kitchen and counted backwards from 10 to make a point. He said he thought the poison would look like a heart attack, that I wouldn't feel anything, that he would cry at the funeral and believe half of it. He asked me if I could forgive him. I told him a thing I swore I'd never say to my son. I told him forgiveness is a ledger, not a switch. Today the debits cover the page. Tomorrow is blank. If he wanted credit, he'd have to earn it one empty square at a time in a place where doors lock from the outside. He cried again. I didn't. The final twist came a week later when Melissa called to say the DA wanted to know if I still planned to press charges on Daniel, my brother. I said yes and no at the same time. Melissa laughed without humor and said that's not a choice. I said it was mine. I met Daniel at the same diner. I slid a folder across the table. It held a notarized affidavit and a check with numbers that make men breathe different. The affidavit said he cooperated before he had to. The check paid off a debt I didn't owe. He asked why. I said because the poison that almost killed me wasn't the worst thing I tasted this month. The worst thing was how much I wanted to see my family burn. I needed one person to walk out of this without ashes in his teeth. He nodded and didn't touch the check until I left. On New Year's morning, I stood in my kitchen and poured a glass of water. Sealed bottle. Clean rim. I raised it to the empty room and said Grace's name. Then I said Aaron's. Then I said mine. I drank. I felt the weight of it sit in my chest like truth. I set the glass down and picked up a pen. I wrote one sentence in my book. The audit is complete. The balance is not. I closed the cover and walked into a year that would not forgive me if I stood still. In the quiet that followed, the house finally sounded like a house again. Not a crime scene. Not a trap. A place a man can breathe. Somewhere in another part of the city, Sienna started counting her days. Aaron started counting his. Darian started counting nothing. I started counting forward for the first time in a long time. Not revenge. Not rage. Just the clean math of living after you refuse to die.